Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our uh, monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, a neighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. And we're back for another edition of our program. And I have an exciting special guest who's joining me now. He is someone who is a writer at a neighborschoice.com, Surit Dasgupta. How you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
Doing great. You know, I'm watching all of these different protests, and they say that the spirit of anti-colonialism of the left is alive and well. And it made me think, is there any topic outside of the anti-colonial framework that the left has? For example, a lot of folks have asked me to weigh in on the abortion issue as it was just put on the ballot in various states and it was defeated. And a lot of people are saying this is an example of how, folks who are against the establishment or conservatives or whatever are making a fool's errand to hang their hat on such strident anti-abortion laws that will ban abortion even in the cases of rape, incest, and endangering the life of the mother, as some of these bills have been that have been defeated in even conservative states like Ohio and Kentucky. But the abortion debate is something that I thought about. I said, that's probably part of the anti-colonial spirit too, because this idea that, like, if it's your body and it's your choice, and the idea that someone could inseminate a person, a being, right? They would call it not a person. We understand it to be a person, but a being is now in your womb without your consent to evacuate it. Then it's kind of like anti-colonialism to say we're going to get you out of this territory. We're going to expel this fetus out of this territory and reclaim this land. That's kind of the anti-colonial spirit that animates the pro-abortion movement.
Well, it's being framed as an anti-colonial adjacent movement in the West, but I don't think it is. It has nothing to do with the struggle against colonialism, in the sense that this concept of reproductive rights is not to be found anywhere in the world except for the countries that are in the West.
But
So,
every doesn't almost so many countries have abortion rights as part of their legal apparatus now, right?
well, the that's because the current nations, all of them, are seeking to imitate the West in some form of another. But there are still a lot of countries where abortion is illegal or limited, restricted. There are some countries that do not allow abortion, except in the case of, where the mother's life is in danger. So,
I don't know what countries those are. I mean, most of the countries it seems have adopted abortion rights as part of their package. Saudi Arabia probably doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, many countries in the Middle East, you have India where abortion is restricted, heavily restricted, and you have a lot of like some of these Latin American countries,
Do you know what the
they
you know
didn't
what the
have.
do you know what the
Mhm.
rules are for abortion in India, or is it based on each state, region, or what?
Well, it's like only allowed to certain week, I guess. Uh, I'm not really that familiar, but it's like I said, it's heavily restricted. Uh, it's not like abortion is. I mean, abortion is not really practiced that much in India. It's like we have one of the lowest percentages of abortion in the world. Uh, Probably some at the bottom of the list.
Is the
On the
Hindu
top,
is the Hindu religion mainstream typically pretty anti-abortion, or not, doesn't talk about it?
that's a very good question. The Hindu uh culture of the past was pretty much against abortion. Gandhi was famously against abortion, and a lot of the Hindu leaders at that time were anti-abortion. But the modern day Hindus are more secularized, and they live in cosmopolitan cultures, and they want to mimic the West in terms of you know its concepts of rights and all
Right.
of that. And so they are very susceptible to influence from that perspective. And they a lot of modern day Hindu women, I would say, are pro abortion, but they haven't been able to impact the laws of this country in a very radical way like their Western counterparts have.
Right. It just seems to be that the general leftist brand of anti-colonialism that has swept all over the world uh, continues to have this mindset that it's a totalizing worldview, and it encapsulates not just nations occupying or colonizing lands that they don't feel are theirs, but also it includes the idea of patriarchy itself as a type of colonial institution in which men have some kind of leadership or superior status as they would see it to women in government or society at large. That patriarchy is where they get this concept of abortion restrictions coming from. And then they would say that it's an act of anti-colonialism to strike down the male patriarchy's ability to impose itself, including its emissary, the fetus, onto the female womb, right, without having any, objection in terms of, allowing for abortion. So that's a kind of colonial
Well,
conquest mindset that they would say is behind the legal, argument to restrict abortion.
I mean, if they're thinking like that, they're pretty ignorant of history because uh, the people who actually fought against colonialism in places like India and Ethiopia, these people were staunchly pro-life. They were staunchly anti-abortion. They recognized abortion as a kind of Trojan horse, uh, that it snuck in this depopulation agenda under the guise of women's rights or whatever. So they recognize that. But yeah, if you're talking about the modern so-called anti-colonial movement, then that is completely co-opted, especially in the West. I think that is completely co-opted by the establishment and used to push uh political elites agendas.
Yeah, it starts with the assumption that there is no inherent differences between the gender other than that which is mediated by social constructs such as the institutions of capitalism, patriarchy, Christianity, whatever, right? those things are institutions that impose systematically through generations of oppression and structural subjugation the interest of the woman to the point where they accept this kind of lie. This is their line of thought that there's some kind of difference inherently between the genders, and so their argument is there are no true inherent differences in the gender. That gender is totally constructed by the society you're in, and that if your society is telling you that there's a difference between the gender roles, that they are part of the systemic oppression of women, and therefore must be fought against and must be dethroned, must be taken down, and ultimately that's the thing that animates this spirit of kind of the abortion rights celebration that so many folks are engaging in, where they celebrate the right of abortion. It's a kind of saying, hey, look, we are done with this idea that there are differences between the genders. We are going to loudly proclaim that gender is a construct, and we're constructing it as such to get our power. And the idea being that if one is to carry a child that they don't want to carry, that they are, inherently being, basically it's an act of violence against their will, against their conscience, and against their will. And therefore, that society needs to be torn down.
Right. They frame they actually have conceived the oppressive structure accurately, but they sort of miss the point by giving this oppressive structure a gender. And because this movement consists of primarily women, it plays into this resentment against the opposite gender, and they give the oppressive structure a gender, and they term it quote unquote patriarchy, right? So again, like, if they claim that their movement is anti-colonial, then again they are ignorant of history, because a lot of societies prior to colonialism were absolutely patriarchal. So when they say they want to rid colonialism, uh, what are they exactly talking about, right? Are they talking about a return to the ancient kind of patriarchy that a lot of these ancient societies had? And yeah, I mean, and of
Yeah,
course,
that's part of the strangeness of what people have pointed out, where this kind of global leftist anti-colonial movement, they've brought the Palestinian cause into their milieu, and there's been an
right,
alliance there.
and that's a patriarchal society.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of Arabic and other folks who have come out in protest and demonstration for the Palestinian cause, but then it gets kind of mixed in some of those protests. There's leftists and socialists and communists and feminists alongside folks who would probably rather have a stricter form of patriarchy than anything those folks want, which is strange, right? Why is it that they're given a pass? And now the question, that the easy, quick answers is to say, well, because they're victims too. I think the general line of thought with the leftist mind is because Islamic folks are Muslims are victims of a colonialism and so forth, or prejudice, because they come when they're in Western countries, they get treated certain ways. Therefore, their victimhood status gives them a pass for some of their more primitive views, such as patriarchal views, anti-abortion views, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and we also have to keep in mind that a lot of these are managed dialectics. So it's a simple person might come across these leftist pro-Palestinian protests and say, "Oh, they're concerned about the victims over there." But are they really? Because these same people are not really challenging the establishment on any other topic. For example, the Ukraine thing, right? They're pretty much silent or like pro-Ukraine, like people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and all of these people like the squad, they're pretty much pro-Ukraine, right? And so like if they're like not challenging the military-industrial complex when it comes to uh other wars, and they're like only doing it in this, there's a high chance that they are operating from like as a controlled opposition, uh like basically uh you know luring the right adjacent people, right, the right wingers into supporting Israel because they see their opponents cheering on for Palestine. So it's just like a divide and conquer thing, right? So they may claim to be anti-colonial, but they're really being duped into a very classic colonial trait, which is divide and conquer, which is what the British Empire used to do in all of the countries where there were multiplicity of communities. They used to divide people according to religious lines, for quote unquote administrative reasons or whatever. But it was quite obvious that they were trying to divide the public, so they want to unite and go against the real enemy, which is the establishment. And I think this is also playing out in America, uh, where you have people like some of these conservatives who claim to be pro-life, but they are absolutely anti-life where when it comes to war and invasions post 9/11 or whatever. So they're like they're really exposed as not serious pro-lifers at all when they are okay with children being bombed in the Middle East, but they're just like, okay, just don't do it at Planned Parenthood or whatever. So
Yeah.
there's like it's the same thing with the right as well,
The
because
Christian way of looking at these topics is to say that it's not the establishment as the villain, and it's the establishment and the mob, the revolutionary revenge mob. Both of them are equally uh, wrong in some sense because they're all rooted in sacrifice of some for the greater good of their cause. And the Christian ultimately indicts every human person as capable of being a scapegoater, uh, either in the revolutionary form or the establishment lackey form, whichever side a person chooses. But we're all guilty of being scapegoaters and have the potential to scapegoat in very violent ways if given certain circumstances. That's the Christian revelation in history that opens up as a kind of technological process the ability for societies to move past this stuff, right? This dialectic of the revolutionary versus the establishment. So I think that has to keep it, that Christian balance of redeeming the establishment and the revolutionary while also condemning both of their acts of violence is the proper position as a Christian when you look at any of these different topics. So how does that apply to the abortion issue? The abortion issue, you know, the again, and I've talked about this, I think on the past, but the framing of the abortion issue is something only Christianity has provided a toolbox for which people to misuse certain things to frame things in a certain way. So, for example, the idea of framing, the right to an abortion as something that's inherent to one's individual sovereignty and their right to their own body and their choice, right? This is something that Christianity is the one that creates this idea of free agency. As free agency, that every human person, no matter if they're a part of the aristocracy or a slave or whatever, has free agency. And then from that free agency, you get other principles like bodily autonomy, right? There's the idea that your body is not to be used by someone who has more power over you, like so many folks were doing in the ancient world, or through slavery or subjugation or rape or all these other things. these are things that Christianity comes about in history and brings the impetus for the world to wrestle with these concepts. The right to have bodily autonomy, to say no to forced drugs, as we saw recently a few years ago, or the right of bodily autonomy to say no to, indentured servitude or any other type of coercion that uses subjugation over your right to your body. These are things that Christianity creates. These ideas are inspired by the substrate of Christianity. And of course, they then get misused for justification to murder a human person, ultimately, right?
Well, Christianity gets rid of the concept of, convenient dehumanization, right? So, just as a naturalist can say, there are many stages of life, like when a tree is growing up from the ground, it has its pre-adult stage. But it's still alive, right? And then it grows into a big tree and plant whatever. So the same goes for human life. When a human seed is conceived in the womb, that is like stage one of that life. And Christianity makes sure that it gives no space for those wanting to look at a baby and say that baby is not a human being, it's just some other cellular thing or whatever. One of the ways it does this is through the nativity narrative, where like you have three holy people or from the east coming and worshipping the infant Jesus, as is basically is God is a child, a helpless child in a vulnerable stage. And because that's such a big part of the Christian story, Christianity has this special emphasis on the child in whatever shape it may be in, right? It doesn't matter if it's in the fetal stage or adolescent stage. It's a human being who is vulnerable to violence,
Right.
and that's why Christianity grants it special protection. And yeah, you were going to say something?
And the culture today just deifies the concept of choice, right? Because again, let's go back to some of the foundations it has. There is no difference between the genders. It's only the differences we have are in their worldview today, the blank slate ism of their ideology today, tabula rasa, that all of this difference between genders is socially constructed so that women should not feel any consideration for, like if they have a fetus in their oh my god, I should have a self-sacrificial consideration for that child's right to live over my right to do what I want to do, right? That do what I want to do part, right, is where we get into the interesting gods at play here, right? Because the do what I want to do is truly mimetically motivated to this idea that, wait a second, I am supposed to have a career. I've been told that women are paid 70 cents for every dollar that a man is paid. All these narratives, these myths that have been propagated in this culture to stoke envy and resentment, to say, look, if I am not the head of if I'm not the CEO or some kind of like high performing six figure, at least, if not, I should be a millionaire. Everybody thinks they're supposed to be a millionaire, whatever. If I'm not in a high social status situation myself, that's because I have kind of succumbed as another victim of patriarchy in its imposition of alien differences over gender. And that's why men are in those jobs that I should have, or some kind of revenge resentment that just stews people. And that god of resentment, that god of the crowd, the god of wanting to be better than the other, to have more status than the other, and to signal to other women that I am a high status woman because I am freely liberated and I have full sovereignty over what lives or dies in my womb. That is a god, right? That's a mimetic constructed God, really. So the child is actually going through a kind of rite of passage in the birth process, right? It's almost as if, you know, the child, like, you know, those ancient societies would do things where you'd have to run through and go into a shack, which people would stab swords into the shack or something. And if the child is still alive in the night, in the next morning, they get to live. It's a rite of initiation into the society or something. They did all these types of rites of passages in all different forms. And some of them were deadly. And you can think of this abortion rite as this kind of, it's like you don't know if the God's going to strike you or save you. And if you make it through that gauntlet and you're born, then you're like allowed to live in society, because our society has not yet, they're trying on the margins, but they haven't yet normalized the idea of being able to have actual infanticide, right? Of like a baby who's born, who's healthy or whatever. You just say, oh no, I kill him. It's okay, kill him. Like, you know, that's not legally sanctioned. So it's almost like if you make it through the gauntlet of the rite of passage through the birth canal and you get out, then you're safe. The God of deified choice, demos, or whatever you want to call it, has decided to spare your life. So you should be thankful, right?
Yeah, I think you're getting into something here that many people don't take into consideration. This is the illusion of choice. So, like, what are they choosing to do exactly, right? Like, this is like it has been presented as an individual choice in this age of quote unquote individualism, but it's not really an individual choice when you're forming a whole political movement around it, and you're getting sucked into a mob which is demanding that everybody, this so-called right, be extended to everybody. And it gets even more interesting when you consider that you within that crowd, these you know pro-choice people uh, get into mimetic rivalries with one another, where one person gets up and says, I've had this many abortions, and the other person says, that's nothing, I had this many abortions. So you can see the obvious mimetic rivalry, the mimetic conflict developing within that mob under the illusion of choice. And how
Because it's like,
Christian,
because the woman, because what the woman who signals the most amount of disinterest in the amount, like the most amount of disinterest in the value of the lives that they have ended in their womb, is signaling the most valiant, in some sense, self-sacrificial alignment with the God of the age, right? They're showing, look, I'm willing to look, you know, it's like, what are you, think about it like ancient gods, right? You know, sir, you know, the ancient, you know, God of Aztecs, present me the heart, right? Bam, here's the heart. That's what you're willing to offer, a beating heart, right? And so you can think of these women who are socially competing for, I've had 5 abortions, I've had 11 abortions, I enjoy it, I have a party every time. Go do my job now, working for a Hallmark card or whatever. It's like, okay, so wait, how many times does this have to happen before we start to realize what's going on here, right? That these are women standing on the tower. In the old days, you stood in front of a ziggurat or a temple, right? Now you go on TikTok or whatever, right? You make your point, that's your tower, and you can assemble a mob of humans and say, hey, you know that God we worship called choice? That God should be proud of me because I've sacrificed 11 of my own young, such that I would love to support whatever the God of choice demands of me. And if it means even sacrificing 11 of my young and laughing and having a party while doing it, that's how tough and resolute my dogmatic love for this God is. You see what I mean? It's a God thing. This is
yeah,
religion.
yeah, it is a religion because it really gets exposed as a sacrificial religion fast when you see the mimetic conflicts erupting within the movement. So in the ancient, what strikes me as particularly interesting is that in the ancient days, before the ascension of Christianity, you would see things like child sacrifice as a once in a month or once in a year ritual. But now it's get has gotten to the point where it is widespread and normalized, which is not I'm not saying that Christianity has failed in its attempt to deify the human person, but it has really uh, caused chaos in the sense that people are trying to make this unconsciously trying to make this a religious right, but at the same time they are demystifying that religious right as they are doing it.
Right.
So when you do one thing, when you commit human sacrifice more often outside of your ritualized, timetable, it becomes normalized, and therefore it does not become mystical anymore. It loses its
Right.
mystery sense of mystery. And in this way, Christianity, Jesus Christ really does deal a great death blow to this, so because it's when something like a human sacrifice loses its mystical charm, it it automatically becomes trivial, right? It
Right.
becomes
So then you have
like,
to, that's where you get the, oh, I got to do more and more and more, right? Right. See, that's the sad thing, is that
yeah,
it's
yeah,
not even considered, like an act of revolutionary egalitarianism to have had one abortion. It's almost like, it's sad, but what you're saying is true. It's like, it's passe. It's similar to other attempts to revivify the sacrificial violence of the past, like, like the narrative of like in 20th century, millions of people were sacrificed and slaughtered, and yet it didn't create unanimity for any of the grand ideologies that were trying to reach God status, right? In the old days, you had to sacrifice one, maybe, or a few to create the cathartic release for the community to say, oh, okay, we've discharged our angers and our bloodletting and our grievances onto this vehicle as an atonement offering to gods of our time, and that satisfies them, right? Well, the gods, when they fell to earth and were revealed to be human beings, they are less and less satisfied, even with the more and more amounts of humans that we sacrifice to try to propitiate the gods, which in fact are us. And the way we try to, get out of looking at these things as crass examples of deifying human beings is to create these big others called ideologies, right? Like, well, this is not for, if you ask the average abortionist, is this a god of humanity? Is this a god of people? Are you deifying the human person and its right to be able to impose its way onto another? Oh, no, no, no. This is about choice. Choice. Yeah. Well, choice is an abstract word, right? It becomes this other wherein you can hide the reality of the brute imposition of power over another that's taking place. You have to create a euphemism, which, as you mentioned, is less powerful because it's demystified than the older forms of these abstract others. The abstract other in the ancient world was Thor, and you kind of believed in Thor, right? You believed in this, but the average person believed in the reality of Thor. And now it's not Thor, whatever, it's choice, or it's whatever, equal pay, or whatever the little ism that just animates this kind of euphemism for doing, oh, what's the word they use? Reproductive health, right? Is that the word they use now? Reproductive health?
reproductive, yeah, something like that. Reproductive rights,
Women's
reproductive
health.
health.
They use women's
Yeah,
health.
women's
Like
health. Yeah,
women's health has nothing to do with stopping the seed oils or any of the stuff that they're killing people with. It only has to do with the sacred right of the sacrifice of a child that's unwanted in the womb, right? It's amazing how that works. But those euphemisms, that's a great point you mentioned, because they've been demystified from gods to now they're hiding as ideological constructs and euphemisms. Those are much more tenuous in their power and made in terms of hiding the reality of the violence, right? Because we hide our violence behind words like what's going on overseas right now. Oh, it's collateral damage. No, that's called human beings torn apart, but you have to hide your conscience by using a euphemism that kind of constructs this kind of third status, right? Where it's not human, it's collateral damage. It's, you know what I mean? It's the cost of war, it's a mistake. Whatever it is, it's always an attempt to revivify the sacred, in which you say, well, we sacrificed your son, Bill, to Thor. And they're like, why? You just did that because you needed to get your anger. No. We didn't sacrifice Thor because we were all angry because the crops aren't growing and we're mad at each other and we just needed to beat up on somebody. No, we didn't do that. Thor, you see the lightning up there? Thor made us do it. You see that? Thor did that. That's what they believed. By and large, they believed in that construct, but then they stopped believing in it over time. And the same thing, like you said, is happening, but at a faster rate with these ideologies like collateral damage. That's a magic word I throw out. By the power of collateral damage, I declare this children are allowed to be murdered. No, you're not. Bullshit. Humanity calls them out for it.
Right. And these revivifications that you mentioned, these words, euphemisms, collateral damage, they start losing their luster, right? And
reproductive health. It sounds Orwellian and creepy, right?
right. And I mean, like, even look at the again, coming back to the so-called anti-colonial movement. Sorry to bring it up again, but it's so interesting in that, okay, like when you're trying to paint the existing culture or whatever as patriarchal, what exactly will you want to get back to, right? But the ancient societies had human sacrifice. Yeah. So do you want to get back to human sacrifice? Do you want to get back to that? So it's like really a regressing movement, not a progressive movement. It wants to go back to the pagan society of olden times, but it cannot do that because it does not have the appetite to achieve that. Because in order to do that, you will have to restore human sacrifice as openly as possible, and that is not possible in today's day and age.
Right.
Because when you see babies getting ripped apart in wars and whatever, in all of these violent skirmishes, then automatically you're proving that you don't have the appetite to set of crucifixions on the side of the road by the hundreds. You can't do that because it's not in your appetite, right? And
that's what I mean by the idea that Satan has to hide and paint himself as a slain lamb more and more to keep his process going of justifying sacrifice because somebody else was sacrificed, right? Satan casting out Satan as this anthropological system of maintaining power over people by having an establishment that sacrifices and then having a revolutionary overthrow of that establishment. In the past, it wasn't that way. It was more like usually it would be, having an establishment and then having the chaos of rivalrous imitations spill out. That was a Satan that then was put down by the establishment. Now it's establishments that get overthrown by revolutionary counter establishments that then become establishments and then get overthrown again and again. Same basic Satan casting out Satan dynamic, but it's not as effective, and it's increasingly not as effective. And Satan has to paint himself, his process, the satanic system. I'm talking about it not from a theological, but from the anthropology of Satan as a system. This system has to maintain itself by covering its ugliness with more and more elaborate arguments for being human, right? And just being innocent and a victim, most importantly. And that's why, look at the area, Surit, where abortion is beaten, right? It's when they have laws or when they have narratives that say because there have been some laws in recently in the states that have tried to appear. I mean, I don't know the details and all these different things, and there's usually exceptions for all this stuff, but apparently there have been laws that have tried to say, look, there's no exceptions for rape or incest or the endangerment of the life of the mother, right? Those are the three things they use. But look, sir, that's where the power of the uh, pro-choice, pro-abortion movement is most alive, right? It's when they can trot out a collection of victim stories and examples, which are real, to then say a counterweight against the protection of the human life of the little baby, of the fetus, right? So they can say, look, how could you say it's, that a woman can't address a fetus and get rid of it if they were a victim of rape? They didn't choose this life, and so therefore, how could you ever force? I mean, and it sounds ghastly, it sounds horrible when you think about it. Like, okay, having to give, to carry the child of a rapist, that sounds horrific, right? And that sounds horrible for any human being to think about that on a level like that, right? On the other hand, they'll say, well, incest, right? I mean, what a monstrosity that you would allow someone who is a victim of incestual rape. And again, these examples, that's very rare. Incestual rape is not happening on the level that the narrative, tries to make it seem or feel, because it's all about emotions with these narratives. The last one being, endangering the life of the mother, right? What about if this law passes, women who have, ectopic pregnancies where the child is going to be, dying and because of the and it's endangering the life of the mother to keep it in there, and you're going to make it illegal for them to deal with it? So those are examples of where, okay, so you're saying the child has to be kept in the womb till the full term and natural birth or whatever, even if that's going to kill the mother. Shame on you. You're sacrificing this innocent woman's life for the life of the child. So you're choosing now. So they would say you are sacrificially choosing who lives and who dies. You're saying, well, sucks to be you. You have to die, mother, because our ideology of patriarchy imposes its desire to have this baby born no matter what. And so that is an assault and on that's a pushback, right, on the idea that the baby is the true victim, right? So that what I'm trying to get at is that the reigning power religion behind abortion rights is not doing it because of those marginal cases. It just trots out those marginal cases for persuasion tactics for the vast majority of folks who are more in the middle on this issue. Because if you poll Americans, most Americans want restrictions on abortion a lot tougher than what they typically have in their local states, as long as you allow for carve-outs for rape and incest and the endangering of the life of the mother. If you allow those carve-outs, they're pretty strict on abortion. Most states are. I mean, if you poll the population, so the younger people are becoming more, like even the TikTok generation is becoming more pro-life on this matter, even outside of a religious framing of the issue or a Christian framing or whatever, So they have to use carve-outs to push back on the victim power of the unborn child, is what I'm saying.
So you make a very valid point, and I guess this is where the real issue of women's rights come in, because what have been pushed as women's rights are not really women's rights at all. What really are women's health, and all of these solutions that we need to be pushing is issues like, okay, childbirth seems to be a very painful experience for a lot of women, and how can we use this technological this innovation oriented mindset that we modern men have to provide solutions so that childbirth is no longer painful. You see that the Orthodox tradition is that the birth of Christ was relatively unpainful. So I'm not saying that that's true or not, but it seems very interesting that God's intention of uh, a woman giving birth to a child, God's vision of, rather, I would say, of a woman giving birth to a child should not be a painful experience for a woman. And this seems to be achievable with the technological insights that we modern men have, modern human beings have. And but these sorts of solutions are pushed to the sidelines with silly stuff like, okay, here, look, here are two men talking about what a woman should do or not do. These so the with modern human beings are being gaslit by establishment adjacent people into accepting solutions which always end with the death of a life, like you mentioned, selecting, okay, like death is always the answer, you just have to select which person gets to die. It's either the fetus, or it's you, or it's the rapist, or whoever, like it's always has to be some blood has to be spilled, which is the sacrificial solution, right? Blood solves everything, the spilling of blood solves everything, right? It brings catharsis or whatever. But the real solution that Christ brings is that the solution of what you often say is the signs and wonders things, right? Where we employ our creativity, we put our mind and to the test, and we put our skin in the game, and we come up with solutions which, like you said, the nutritional kind of thing, which, don't eat the seed oil thing, that may actually contribute to the pain that you're going to face when you are giving birth to a child, the consumption of omega-6 or whatever, so those kind of things are really what should be women's issues.
We
uh
should eliminate we should make sure that we do everything we can to eliminate incest from happening, right? And this kind of raping
right,
should be banned.
but there are always multiple
Raping
aspects.
is rape is banned, but it should be more effectively banned. It shouldn't be something that people feel like they can get away scot free doing, which unfortunately our criminal justice system has now made it so that people who do violent crimes like rape get off with light sentences and they're back on the streets to rape again. Meanwhile, people who do nonviolent process crimes or regulatory crimes get thrown away for a long time, to make an example of the state telling people to not defy its sacred rights of passage in the economy. Again, all these different things can be addressed if we had a society that wants to tell the truth and protect human persons and victims. That includes victims of rape. They should be protected. What do you say to the idea? This is getting into kind of a pragmatic political debate, but some folks on the conservative circle say, stop falling into the trap of saying there shall be no exceptions. Because what's happening after Roe v. Wade was repealed, it goes to the states, and now states have been pushing new laws here and there to either solidify a pro-life position in the state or a pro-choice position, and that's where these elections are being fought on. And so some conservatives said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You should allow for carve-outs for abortion to be allowed for rape, incest, and the risk of the life of the mother being lost in death. You should allow those carve-outs so that we can have moderate restrictions on abortion, or more or stronger even than what we have currently, restrictions on abortion, but we'll be able to actually win on it, rather than if you go for the purist stance of no exceptions for abortion on rape, incest, and endangering the life of the mother, no exceptions, period. And then they fail over and over again. And then the argument is, because you want the purity version of the pro-life law today, you're going to end up allowing for more kids to be killed in abortion, right? As opposed to, if you take a more nuanced, incremental approach, then you can save lives today and slowly move things the right way as the culture changes.
Right.
What do you stand on that?
Well, I mean, like I recognize the reality that there's not going to be any overnight change, right?
Yeah.
That's like the realistic way of looking at things. No big political issues are solved overnight. There's always an in between. There always a transition, whether that's a quick transition or a slow transition, but there is like a transitory phase that always leads to the final outcome. So even in the state case, like okay, like the entirety of America did not wake up one morning all of a sudden and decide that, oh, all right, we gotta have reproductive rights. We gotta make this part of the constitution, right? Well, it happens slowly after years and years of you know, propaganda or whatever. It was introduced into schools. It was introduced through activism, political activism. There was the birth pill that came prior, or whatever, you know. There was the suffragette movement that came before that. So it always there's always a transition stage. Doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to move in one narrow direction. It could be all over the place. You know, it could be smuggled in through this, you know, return to traditional values that a lot of young people seem to be getting into these days. You know, when we see that young people are moving towards more traditional oriented religion, uh, so that could be part of the package deal. As for exceptions and all of that, well, we really want we really don't need to have that discussion if we focus on, like, okay, look at the 19th century. How many kids were dying in their infancy? Like, people used to have a lot of children back then, right?
Yeah.
So half of them would die off, but right now we have come to a stage where that is very rare. Like, a
Right.
lot of kids grow into their older years, so that proves that we have the medical information, we have the potential to get rid of you know, painful birth experiences. And also coming to that, the child of a rapist thing, well, I mean, like, we have to learn to again work hard on separating the person from the collective, right? When it comes to guilt and these sorts of things. So the baby that is in the womb did not commit any crime. The baby was unfortunate to have been born at a time during the crime, or after it rather. So there should be, like, look at things like the foster care system that we have in many of the countries. I think it's in America too, right? It's a horrendous system. It's like they move children around from one parent to a household to another, where it comes like where children don't even have time to, you know, settle into one family. They're just moved around like cattle. And you know, they many foster parents are good, but you know, the system is very wanting in
Mhm.
my perspective, right? Because a lot of orphans, they don't really grow up in good households, and that's why
Yeah.
they often get into a lives of crimes and so on. So like, if America would, or any country for that matter, would stop this specialized, you know, technocratic system of dealing with everything, and have a more familial approach to things like rape and all of these things, where they will have, you know, the church can take this place where they would get into the position of, you know, rehabilitating the victims, you know, and just providing a, you know, a brilliant comfort net for families who have been affected by horrible crimes like rape. We wouldn't have any discussions like, okay, who will take care of the child, or you know, why would the mother need to go through such a cruel, tormenting experience of giving birth to the child of a rapist? We would not have these kind of discussions, because we're in an area of stagnation. We're already focused on creating the next big app, but we're not focused on creating the next big technology that will solve the painful experience of giving birth to a child.
Yeah. By painful, you mean when they have life threatening situations too, right?
Well, I mean, even in the normal circumstances, right? When a woman gives birth to a child, it's a very painful experience for her, right?
Yeah.
So that's like an unconscious fear at the back of many young girls' mind. It's like when they think about that, I mean, talk to any young girl, they have an unconscious fear of that kind of experience, right? So
Yeah.
it really is a self-sacrificial thing for them to give birth to a child, because they are trying their hardest. I'm talking about the mothers who give birth on a regular basis.
That's
They
important
really
to point out that self-sacrifice is only allowed when you're self-sacrificing for the God of choice or human autonomy, not for the God of, or for
right.
the true God who would say life is precious no matter how small or no matter how inconvenient. That you're not allowed to self-sacrifice your fear or pain or your choice or your freedom or your career desires. That can never be oriented towards the concept of human life being sacred. That is a sacrifice that is not considered acceptable by our false gods of our culture today. So that's the religious battle of these worldviews colliding. It's one is human person oriented, and the other is human person using when needed. The That gets us back to the bigger topic of what's really moving these different cries for justice, women's rights or anti-colonialism. All of these things are a sign that the world is hungering for justice, and that's why the Christians can speak alongside that message as well, not just pushing back against the revolutionary spirit, which is the one that animates leftist causes, but also critiquing the establishment spirit, which they do critique as well, but we can critique it in a better position. And that is, for example, respect for the human person. I think the left has a point when they say that the right only cares about life sometimes when it's just in the womb matter, and then they don't care when the child grows up and is thrown into poverty or thrown off to war or whatever. I think there's a valid point there, right? Like you were talking about some of these different Christian factions that have said they have power for so long. Some of these folks that have been most zealous for pro-life causes are most zealous for war, even now as we speak. Bomb everybody, bomb Iran, go to war with this place, go to that, send those people to back to the Stone Age, turn it into glass. Okay, if you're saying that and then you're saying I want abortion ban, no wonder they don't want to listen to you. And in some sense, the left is right to call those hypocrites out and to oppose that. So if the Christians are supposed to be the adults in the room, then they have to be the adults in the room. And the adults respect human life and defend human life in all of its different facets and forms. That means there's no victim. If there's no victim, there's no crime, which means most of the laws that animate the local police forces and the federal regulations that we have on the books would have to be eliminated because they're diabolically anti-life, they're anti-human person, they're sacrificially violent, they're pagan, they're anti-Christian. So no victim, no crime gets you out of a lot of these stupid laws. Should be abolished. They should be let go of. These drug wars, all the other stuff, that should be eliminated. And then the wars that we have and the proxy wars and the arming of different sides of the wars around the world, those are anti-life positions as well. And we should oppose all of that. So until Christians can present, a cultural and political message, which is consistently pro-life in all of those different areas I just described, I think it will be very hard for them to get much traction on the pro-life issue.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Right. Christians should learn to be pro-life from womb to the grave, right? So, I mean, a lot of Christians are completely fine with Jesus coming back with his blood soaked robe, white robe, and with sword, brandishing sword and cutting off chopping off the heads of the sinners and whatnot. So like uh, that's like we have to learn to uh, you know we have to learn to mature on that our interpretation of the scriptures, because we are very much immature in our interpretation of the scriptures, where we believe in a trickster god who is violent, who is like non-violent, peaceful person in the first act, but a serial killer kind of,
Yeah, they
mass
made him out to
murderer in the
be
second act.
they made him out to be Ric Flair, the old wrestler who would pretend to be very kind in front of people and then do a low blow.
Yeah, like get down on the knees and say
Yeah,
no, no, and then
have
no, then
mercy. I
poke
love
the
you.
person
I
in the
have
eye.
mercy. I love you. I'm non-violent, and then bam, do a low blow or
Low
something, and
blow,
the
yeah,
person turns
low
his
blow or a
back.
poke in the eye.
I
Yeah,
mean, that's not
yeah.
Jesus. Good Lord, but that's how so many people take him to be. Unfortunately, because that Jesus is more in their image. Revelation 19 is where it talks about the. We're not going to get into it today, but I'll just preview a little bit. Revelation 19 talks about the passage where it describes Jesus as this figure coming back, and uh, there's blood all over his there's blood all over his robe. But when you look at what it quotes in that chapter, it quotes the same psalm that Peter quotes in describing how Jesus defeated his enemies on the cross. So it makes you wonder, why is his blood soaked? Why is his robe soaked? Because he went through a lot.
Because he went through a very bloody death on the cross. That's
That's
why.
what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I was about to say. He went through a lot of sacrificial violence done to him, right, to defeat his enemies on the cross. So when you see that Revelation 19 thrown out at you, and there's a lot of interpretation. Some people take a preterist, partial preterist interpretation of it, that those are describing things that happened to, because Revelation uses a lot of the same symbols that people who were well read in Torah at the time, the Jewish folks would understand the symbols being used because they were familiar with Torah symbols, and they'd be like, "Oh, I understand what you're talking about." A lot of people believe that most of that stuff was stuff that happened around the time that the book was written to. The audience that was under a lot of persecution from the empire. At the same time, even if you take the futuristic perspective that it's talking about some kind of completion of history, which I think either way you go, you still have the fact that it's quoting the same psalm, or why do the nations rage and all that. It's quoting that in that passage, which is the same psalm that Peter and others used to describe what Jesus did when he defeated the powers on the cross, which just goes back to show, for folks who think, oh, well, why are you saying Jesus isn't going to use violence when he comes back? Because he already defeated his enemies on the cross non-violently. So anything he does in history is going to be in the same way. Why would he use an exact opposite tactic if it was not effective? This is so stupid. It's almost as if he did the cross thing, it didn't work. So now I'm like, all right, now it's payback time. Okay, if that's your God, then that's a false God. Because the real God
Right.
does the same non-violent defeat of the powers that they describe him doing on the cross. So the cross of history is going to unfold in that same non-violent Aikido dismantling of powers as they spill the blood, and Christ continues to show us as his followers how to non-violently deal with it so that we defeat it, because here's the bottom line. I want to end with this, but it's a point I've been wanting to make, today, and I want to get it out here before we wrap up. Is this notion that, well, he's got to get revenge. That undergirds the wickedness of the left, sir. Because the wickedness of the left is what makes the left's error so wicked when they go that far is that it's all about revenge, and the conservative people who want a Jesus who comes back violently, and it's Catholics, it's Orthodox, it's Christian Protestants. A lot of those folks want that. They say Jesus is going to come back violently, whichever way. It's easy to, this group or that group. No, there's a large contingent of that in all the different traditions. But the problem with it is it's motivated by the same vengeance spirit that motivates what makes the left so violent and dangerous when they get going to where they go. which is vengeance. Because think about it. For example, look at what we have right now. We just saw a story of this young man. He got accosted by a whole crowd of African American kids just stomping on this white kid. He's 15, I think, and he's dead. His dad kept him on life support, trying to see if they could get him back. No, he's gone. And, of course, the conservatives say, oh, if it was the other way around, it would be an outrage. And it's true. But the question that the left needs to ask, to be addressed, they need to address this. And they need to be confronted with this. And they need to be shamed if they don't answer it the right way. Is where does this go? If your idea is that you want to violently overthrow every kind of grievance that's ever been done in history so that it's going to be normalized to, kill people who are white or whatever, or starts off just firing them, starts off with not hiring them, starts off with them not getting jobs, starts off with them being excluded from university admissions at a rate that's obscene. Then it goes to, normalizing them being punched, normalizing white grandmothers being hit with chairs, as we saw recently on social media. Then it goes to normalize, well, he had it coming to him. White people can be killed because the TV puts out a racial narrative 24/7, and Hollywood puts out racial grievance movies every 5 seconds. And you keep stoking this resentment, this anger, vengeance, vengeance, vengeance. At what point does if that goes for, let's say, slavery happened for 400 years. So if this goes on for another 400 years, the opposite direction, is it at that point that the leftist professors of 400 years from now would say, okay, you white people have been victimized. You've been victimized enough that now you get to be the righteous revenge people. Go overthrow everybody that's been hurting you and do it all again the opposite direction. Is that the way it goes? Because that's the stupidity and the insanity of this revolutionary spirit of resentment, is that it never ends. That's why Christ repudiated it. That's why he repudiated it in his time. Right? That's why he was flanked by two revolutionaries on either side of him while he was being crucified. They were being crucified too for the revolutionary spirit. But that same spirit is what animates this revolutionary spirit that is actually infecting conservatives and Christians. It's at what point does it stop? At what point do you get to call time out and say, okay, now we get to punch you for things you did to our great parents? Oh, we do? Okay. So when you punch that person, how many like generations does it have to like sit and take it, and then they're legitimately allowed to violently overthrow the oppression? Because it won't play out well. It'll just be all against all. We're talking the unraveling of civilization as we know it into mimetic, undifferentiated chaos. Because it won't just be about racial grievances that will be revenge cycles. It'll be about wealth grievances. It'll be about ethnic grievances. It'll be about weight grievances. It'll be about sexual orientation grievances. Everything will be split into undifferentiated, violent rivalry. And that's exactly what the Bible describes as the apocalypse. So let's hope we don't go there. Let's hope that, we can go in a different direction.
Well, that's in Revelation chapter 19, right? In verse 19, it says, out of the mouth of Jesus comes a sword, and with that sword, he strikes the nations. What's the thing that comes out of his mouth? It's the word of God, right? Yeah. The word of God is a double-edged sword, as it says elsewhere in epistles. And we are seeing this undifferentiated chaos because Jesus has struck the world with his sword of non-violence. He has testified to the futility of the sacrificial mechanism, and it has proved once and for all that tit-for-tat violence, casting out Satan with Satan, will not work anymore, because there will be no unanimity. There will be no united. There won't be any gathering around the victim anymore.
Yeah, there's no final revenge.
Right.
at some point it'll come back, and it just never ends. And then it just spirals because of the technologies that we have, and because, like you said, nobody believes in the myths, so they don't even hold. That's what I'm trying to get. They're not the mythic violence that used to contain violence for a while, even after the cross, because it's still been working. It's just breaking down slowly, and it's like unwinding. This machine is slowly coming undone as it moves. It's still slightly been, it's been working to various levels, but it's not going to work in any truly lasting sense in any way. I mean, even like we said, the 20th century, they couldn't get any kind of unanimity to be, and they were murdering millions of their opponents on different sides of that issue, of that fight. And they couldn't get it to, and they try to create this, mythic consensus. And then we learn the tragedies and horrors of all these different ideologies. And we learn that, and it's like, why do we have to keep repeating the same mistake? Why do we have to keep allowing this kind of nonsense to continue? Oh, well, you get to dehumanize these people because they have a skin tone that looks like people who did this or did that in 1604 or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, if that's going to keep going, it's going to spiral into violent insanity, because it's not going to hold as long. You're not going to get, and it's because it's already showing you in real time, you're not going to get the people who are supposed to be the new candidates for kicking to go along with that. They're not going to go along with it forever. They're going to eventually push back, and it's going to get violent and ugly, and it's just despicable, the whole thing. And that's what you're right, sir. That's the blood. I mean, you could see it's Jesus's blood. We have to look at it again, but you could also see it as the blood of all our victims that we're doing to one another. I mean, if Jesus were to show up in Israel today, right? I mean, there'd be a lot of blood to look at, would there not be? If he's walking around the rubble, there'd be a lot of blood to get on his robe. So,
Right. Yeah. Because every time we are killing each other, we are crucifying him all over again.
yeah. Well, very good. I appreciate your time. And just like Paul, remember, Paul was on the road trying to kill people in the name of God, in the name of Jesus's God himself, right? And yet he was killing Jesus. And that recognition is what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to close our eyes and say, oh, no, those people who were killed on the Israeli side, they deserve it because they're this. No. They are human beings. You don't kill people. And the same thing goes for the other side. Oh, you get to kill those Palestinians because they are there and they are supporting Hamas because they're hanging out in Gaza. No, you don't. Just like Paul couldn't kill Stephen or anybody else like he was going to kill because he thought his God said it was good. That's what Jesus was confronting, and that's what he is confronting in all of us right now.
Amen.
So thank you, Surit, and appreciate you coming on the program. And email us hello@aneighborschoice.com. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.